Stephen Sashen from XeroShoes.com. I'm the co-founder and Chief Barefoot Officer, and I'm about to invite a very special guest to join us to talk about how you can change your life starting feet first. And so give me one sec to invite in just moments by a dear friend of mine who's going to talk about something that I find near and dear to my heart because it changed my life. And that is when I got out of big, thick, padded motion control shoes and into something that actually let my feet do what is natural. So we've got somebody joining us in just a moment. I'm really looking forward to that. But let me just give you the premise for what we're talking about here. My favorite thing is when people go to the gym and they work on getting everything strong from their ankles up, but they never work on the part from the ankles down, which, most interestingly, that is the part of your body that supports everything from the ankles up. Who knew? So we're going to be talking about how you can very effortlessly and why you're going to want to, there we go. Emily is just joining us. How and why we want to work on all of that strength from the ankles down to make your life better in ways that you probably never even imagined. So Dr. Emily Splichal, welcome. How are you, Em?
Doing amazing. Good to see you again.
Yes, again, because we tried doing this just moments ago and had technological problems, but that's the way it goes. So do me a favor. I gave the world's fastest intro basically saying how important feet are, but we don't pay attention to them. Do you want to tell people how and what you do and what we want to chat about and about how we can improve people's lives feet first?
Absolutely. So I am a podiatrist, but I'm a functional podiatrist, which means I look at the body from a very integrated perspective, also a human movement specialist. And my approach to feet is very sensory based, which I know Steve and everyone at XeroShoes greatly appreciates. There's obviously a biomechanical role, but there's a very powerful neurosensory, neuromuscular role from our feet.
Yeah, let's start with a couple of facts that many people don't know. A quarter of the bones and joints of your entire body are in your feet and ankles. That's so they can bend and move and flex. That is for balance, agility, and mobility. And if you don't let them do that, that function tries unsuccessfully to move up into your ankles, your knees, your hip, and your back and cause problems there because those joints aren't wired for that function. Similarly, to your sensory point, we got more nerve endings in the sole of our feet than anywhere but our fingertips and our lips. So your brain knows what you're stepping on or stepping in, so it can help you move efficiently, effectively, and maybe most importantly, enjoyably. And if you don't feel that stuff, as a friend of mine says, numb feet are dumb feet, and you don't want any part of you to be numb. So what's the first thing that you would want to tell someone if they're completely new to this whole idea that would make them go, ooh?
Yeah, so I actually love to start to explore the power of the sensory foot in your home because it's safe, it's a controlled environment. I believe everyone should be as barefoot as possible in their home. This means taking off your socks, take off your house shoes, just feel the different surfaces and the textures in your home, maybe from the hardwood floor to the carpet, maybe there's outside carpet, grass, and just start to wake up the feet. Another awesome way that I love to do this is by releasing the feet every single morning and evening. Doing it when you brush your teeth, something like the Nero ball is a great way to do that. And you are waking up those 26 muscles on the bottom of the feet, the nerves, the circulation, and the whole integration of our foundation.
When you say releasing the feet, can you tell human beings who have no idea what that means, what that means?
Yes. And I apologize. So when you, if you roll your foot on a lacrosse ball, think of it like a massage. I'm actually not a big fan of rolling the foot. I like pinpoint pressure, which is why I like the neural ball, which splits into the two pieces. So you have two domes that you're standing on. So you're putting pressure onto the muscles to wake up the muscles and the nerves and circulation. That would be the releasing. So massage, trigger points, myofascial work, if people like that term as well. But it's essentially trying to wake up the nerves and the muscles.
Perfect. So, and I agree. The first thing people want to do is start to wake things up by using them in ways you haven't. I don't wear shoes in our house. We're one of those houses. And even more, like, just walking to and from, if your mailbox is at the end of your driveway, walk to and from there. Many of us, here's the thing that's really interesting. I find it really interesting. If you don't give your brain certain kinds of stimulation, it will literally change its shape and change the way it can function. So like if you took your first two fingers and taped them together, after a while, your brain would literally change its shape until it acted like you only had one. And if you remove the tape, you'd be unable to move them independently. And similarly, if you then, because your brain wants to do things correctly, if you leave the tape off and give some stimulation, they'll wake back up, your brain will change its shape again and function again. So if you've been in a big, thick, padded shoe that doesn't let your foot bend and flex and move, that squeezes your toes together, your brain has literally changed its shape, because why waste the energy if you're not going to give it the information it's looking for? So that first step is just kind of wake it up with some of the suggestions that Emily gave. Go for a walk, use that neuroball or other things where you can actually just get some sensory input, and that'll remind your brain how it's supposed to be functioning naturally.
A lot of that, Stephen, just so I may add, because I've seen this in patients, is it's actually subconscious that we don't realize that you're still keeping the fingers together in this sense. I used to have patients that would walk in a cam walker and then they would walk in this weird compensated way. They're no longer in the cam walker, the walking boot. Months later, they're still walking. And I'm like, oh my God, you're not in the boot. So I think that's why I love sensory, because it's about this perception and going barefoot, going minimal, and being conscious about it brings this awareness to your overall movement. That is really the mission behind Naboso. And I know that's a big part of Xero also, is let's also just wake up our awareness to movement.
Well, I've got a weird version of that. I'm not wearing my glasses right now because I'm fine at the distance to my phone. But when I first had my eyes checked and they said, hey, you need glasses, and I put them on, it was like, holy crap, I've been blind for like 10 years and I had no idea, because your brain just adapts very slowly and you get used to that thing, and then that's the thing you keep doing. And so even if you think you're totally fine, you might discover changes. In fact, once you start using your feet naturally, it's a lifelong process of things getting better and better and better as you get used to it, as you get stronger, as you get more sensitive. It's one of my two biggest regrets is the day that I started doing this whole barefoot thing, I didn't take a picture of what my footprint looked like when I got out of a hot tub or a swimming pool. It was an oval with some dots. And now it looks like a footprint. And I also had no way of measuring how responsive my feet were, both flexible and strong and sensory aware, because I definitely feel like my reflex arc has gotten faster because I step off of things that are painful more quickly. I'm not applying weight the way that would put me in a difficult situation. And it never occurred to me to measure those things that have changed so much in the time that I've been doing this, and I wish I had.
Yep. Absolutely. And that I put that as movement accuracy, which is what I'm all about, regardless of your age, athletic performance, or whatever your movement goal is. Movement accuracy, which is what you're essentially describing, is really how we want to be moving.
So once people have gotten used to walking around barefoot, they're going to and from the driveway. They have not yet done things like I've done, which go to Costco in bare feet, or argue with restaurants about whether it's legal to be there with bare feet. It is, by the way. They can have a policy, but it's not illegal. What would be the next thing that you would suggest or that you would want people to explore?
Well, so ultimately, I want people to be barefoot with a purpose. And what that means is that, let's say when you're walking up the stairs, or if you are working out and you're doing squats, whatever it is that you are accessing even more strength from your foot through intentional foot contractions. And I often say that the power of the human foot lies in your toes. So that would be, as an example of walking up the stairs. As you put your foot on the step and you are about to push up to go up the stair, do your toes contract into the ground to actually activate this intrinsic foot strength to then take the load or transfer that load to your hips? Or if you're doing a squat, are you doing the squats by contracting your foot? I posted something on my Instagram today about doing deadlifts, and I'm like really engaging my foot as hard as I can. So how can you get even more out of the foot and the foot muscles by understanding how to access that power?
I like that. It's a thing that I do where if you're walking around barefoot, try and do two things, like spread your toes as wide as you can, and then as they hit the ground, try to like dig your toes through the floor. Is the image that I like to use. Like you're trying to leave marks in the floor, like you're the wolf man as you're walking. That's a really good one that I love doing. And thinking about deadlifting, if you watch like big deal powerlifters, they will deadlift either barefoot or in socks or in the flattest thing they can get away with, because they know that the best way to transfer power into the rest of their body, even though they're holding the bar, is feet first, having them on the ground, engaging those toes.
absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people focus on the arch of the foot and they're just like, oh, how strong is your arch? How do you build the arch? And I really try to make an argument that the power is really in the digits. This is also athletically. I know Xero shoes is getting heavy into basketball and other sports. That vertical jump, acceleration, that is all in your toes. So you need a shoe that's going to allow you to really activate into your digits, spread, as you had said, but then also really have some sort of flex in the shoe that you can grab the ground.
There is data that shows, and for most people who are watching this, I'm hoping you're not in a situation where this is relevant, but shows there's a direct relationship between toe strength and whether you trip and fall, and like my father did 9.5 years ago, break your hip and then don't make it after that. So this is something, again, we pay attention to getting everything above our ankle strong, but not the things that will keep us alive if they are strong. So any other things for strengthening your toes and strengthening your feet that's popping into your brain?
Love toe spacers. That's one of my favorite. Absolutely love toe spacers. They are, I wouldn't say one of the most underrated, but very underappreciated, or now it's quite trendy, but the effect that they have for toe alignment and toe strength. One other one that I will add, which is one of my favorite exercises, is if you put a ball between your heel, and Coach Mike, who I know works with Xero shoes, you put a ball between your heels, and I'll show this here, and then you're doing a calf raise. He calls it a heel smash. That's a Coach Mike term of a heel smash. But as you do a calf raise and you're lifting up with this ball between your heel, you're going to tuck your heels under the ball, which is essentially locking your rear foot. So calf raise, boop, tuck heel under the ball, and then come back down. That is training your arch. So that is training your rear foot. But the way that I cue it is that as you're doing a calf raise with the ball between your heel and you're squeezing the heel or the ball with the heels, you are driving those toes into the floor. So you still can't forget about your digits when you're doing something back here. It's a really, I consider it the king or queen of all short foot exercises because it's a progression of short foot. But yeah, that is one of my favorite foot exercises.
And short foot is sort of like the classic arch strengthening thing that people think about, or if they know about it, that's what they are aware of. For people who don't know what that is, do you want to introduce that as well?
The easiest way to describe short foot is push your toes into the floor. That is
Well,
literally, it
okay.
is. So
No, you're right. Well, so, but if you want to go for like I'm not going to say it's advanced, but I'm going to say it's advanced. If you want to go for the way, oh, I hate that I did that. Sorry, I didn't make, I, I don't know, balloons is not appropriate for talking about short foot exercise, but can you describe what putting your toes into the ground does that most people think of as short foot? Wait, did it do it again? Hold on. Oh, God, it didn't, thank God.
okay,
Okay.
maybe this will do it. I don't know.
Ugh.
Okay. So short foot is an exercise initially introduced by Dr. Vladimir Yanda. Yanda was a Czech physiatrist who was really the professional who started to introduce feet, foot to core, right? So he was starting to get very integrated in his approach. He is by far one of the most respected professionals in my space, for me professionally. So when he would teach short foot, he would teach that you would draw back and you would retract your met heads towards the ball of your foot, which would lift your arch. This is why it's called short foot. You are shortening your foot. Now, just real quick, stay with me. So this way is a very hard way to teach short foot like this. So I work and I've transferred a lot of my focus towards athletics. And if you're working with an athlete who's transferring force very dynamically, you can't land and then retract your foot like this. It doesn't. And then studying fascial lines, I was like, whoa, whoa. I think what Dr. Yonda didn't realize back then, because we understand anatomy a little bit more now, is that this is actually a fascial thing. This story is in your toes. And when you push your toes into the ground, you have to lift your pelvic floor and you exhale. So you are stacking. I know. This is crazy. Stay with me, Steve.
I'm with you.
So
I'm with you.
when you push your toes down, because your deep front fascial line runs from the tips of your toes, lower leg, adductor, pelvic floor, it's actually posterior pelvic floor. So you lift your levator ani, and then you exhale at the exact same time. This is a
Yeah,
power
that's way too much.
stack.
Yeah,
It's a power stack.
that's a lot. Hey, let's jump to a question that came in. This is from Hillary Highland Photo. Can hammer toe, claw toes be released or reversed naturally?
So when I get a question about toe contractures, first thing you want to ask or do is take your toe and can you pull it straight? If you can pull it straight, it is still flexible, which means yes, you can reverse it. If you cannot pull it straight, it is rigid, which means the bone and the joint is essentially sclerosed or fused straight. You cannot reverse that without surgery.
Interesting. I mean, I've seen people where they the muscle tension. I'm not thinking about toes, but I've seen this with shoulders where muscle
Mhm.
tension is so great, people literally think they can't even passively move. And you kind of have to fake them into doing it. So I had a friend who did this one way. The woman said she couldn't lift her arm past shoulder height, and he said, "Bend over, like so your back is parallel with the ground, and can you lift your arm so it's pointing towards the wall in front of you?" And she pointed towards the wall in front of her. He says, "Now stand up," and her arm is way overhead, and she had no idea. So basically, her brain had gotten used to the idea that she couldn't move her arm, so it stopped her from moving, even though she could. So even with like a passive motion, it's like she was holding on
Yeah.
really tightly. We had to kind of fake out her brain to make her move. Have you ever seen anything like that for toes and feet?
I
It's
don't
a
know for
weird one.
toes. And this is again that's where like this is very complicated for like a 30-minute IG live, but if you can just start to create this categorization of is it flexible versus
Yeah,
rigid? Now, majority of the one of the listeners who are out there and curious about these toe contractures, they're still going to be flexible.
yeah.
It's the ones that are like my mom, who's 75, her toes are fused.
Oh
And that's
wow.
just from years of contracture, right? A little bit different.
Yeah.
But what I tell them is even if you have rigid hammer toes, does not mean don't release the bottom of the feet, don't use toe spacers. You still get function out of it. The goal should not be to take a foot that is totally flat and contracted and bunions and be like, how do I make that look like when that person was 20 years old? That's not the goal. The goal is to wake up the nerves, wake up the muscles, get a bigger base of support. Can we get some activation between the foot and the core? To just get increased function about the foot.
Here's a weird question for you, but I have a reason for asking it. Well, no, it's not a weird question for you. It's a question that will sound weird to other people, but it's a question that you will appreciate.
Okay.
Can you talk about the relationship between your foot and your glutes?
Mhm. Yes.
Sorry, wait,
So
sorry, would you?
would I? Sorry, I was like, where's the question? So
Yes, you
yes.
can, but I mean, would you please?
Yes. So there is a biomechanical connection between your feet and your glutes. There's a myofascial and there's a sensory. The biomechanical one is the easiest. When your foot is like this, you have skeletal stacking, let's say. As soon as your feet collapse, and now I just everted my foot, and when I drop my arch, my leg rotates in like this, like that. So when your leg rotates in, you can start to get an anterior tilting of the pelvis. When your pelvis tips forward and your femur internally rotates, you essentially put the pelvis in a position that it makes it hard for your glutes to contract. That's literally biomechanics 101 and length tension relationship. So you're essentially just stretching the glutes that is making them harder to contract. Also, you destabilize the pelvis. And what I often say is your glutes are only as strong as your core is stable. So most of my patients, actually almost all of my patients that I see for foot issues, get pelvic floor work, they get diaphragm
Mm-hmm.
work. We're doing everything is always about what's happening up in your canister, your central. The fascial would be kind of that deep front line that if your foot is sleepy and your deep core, deep hip, pelvic floor is sleepy, well, then your glutes are trying to contract against like a surfboard versus a stable dock, right? So you can kind of make analogies on that. And then there's actually some co-contractions that exist within the brain between the foot and your deep core and your glutes. So it's very, very much connected. The part of the foot that really harnesses this is your big toe, which is why I'm obsessed with the big toe. And a lot of people put their focus on the big toe.
Um, one of the things I really like that, one of the things that I like showing people is if you stand, especially if your feet are parallel, and you have the ability, because not everyone has the ability to squeeze their glutes, which does make your femur, your thigh bones try to rotate externally, basically turn out like that. But you leave your feet planted, you'll find that it actually turns, kind of doesn't even turn your foot, but then suddenly you've developed a bit of an arch, which is another way of showing that strong connection between your feet and your butt, other than when you would kick someone's butt with your feet, which is a completely different conversation.
Yes, yes. So what I often tell people, because I had a conversation with Coach Mike, and he was talking about how a lot of people in the NBA are resistant against barefoot training. And what I told him, this is not his clients. This is
No,
where he gets naysayers, let's say.
got it. Well, because
So,
what's interesting, just as an aside, I won't mention the team, but I know 3 teams that have their players do at least one day of barefoot
oh
training
no, this is
every week
amazing.
because yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway,
this is
sorry, keep going.
amazing. This is
Yeah,
amazing. Essentially, he was just saying, like, for all the naysayers out there, how can you sell barefoot training in a way that isn't just about the foot?
hmm.
So I told a glute story, and I was like, every athlete wants stronger glutes, right? And I was just like, imagine if you are not harnessing deep core stability and foot to core and short foot and these fascia lines, right? I was like, they're activating maybe 90% of the peak potential that they could out of their glutes. So how do you get that extra 1% in such a high performing athlete? That's where I go to barefoot and I look at the
Yep.
feet, right? Is it just makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
There was an interview that was published in the Wall Street Journal with Venus Williams, and the interviewer asked, "What's changed in your training as you've gotten older?" And she said, "I'm focusing on foot strength. I'm doing things like learning how to lift my toes. I'm spending more time barefoot." It was great. We have, I mean, the NBA and WNBA players that we're working with, they're ones who have realized the importance of foot strength for the things they're doing, and that's why we ended up developing a basketball shoe. In fact, Temifik Bentley, who's the center on the Indiana Fever, wears her toe spacers in the barefoot basketball shoe that we developed. So that's a really fun one. And, another thing to keep in mind as we talk about foot strength, I want to jump into this and do a little promo on our end. There's research that came from Dr. Sarah Ridge that showed you can build foot strength as much as doing a foot exercise program, similar to some of the things we mentioned, just by walking in a truly minimalist shoe
Mm-hmm.
like Xero shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other research from Dr. Isabel Sacco in Brazil who showed that for runners who run in whatever the hell they want to run in, doesn't matter if it's a barefoot shoe or a normal shoe, if you build that foot strength from an exercise program, then it reduces your risk of running injuries by 250% over the course of a year. And of course, you don't need to necessarily do that exercise program if you're just walking around in shoes that let your feet move as if they're barefoot. So I say to people when they say, "Oh, I don't really believe in this. I'm happy in my big, thick, padded whatever." I go, "Cool, wear those if you're going out for a run and you like them. But as soon as you're done, get out of them and go barefoot or put on something like Xero shoes for active recovery and building that foot strength that is shown to reduce running related injuries."
Absolutely. I love the active recovery component of it. And I share research like that all the time when I'm trying to demonstrate the case of the benefit that is outside. Well, you don't have to run in them. That's not the only role
Right,
that they have, right? It's
right.
it's fitting them somewhere else within your lifestyle. And that's also barefoot. Doesn't mean you don't have to go to Costco barefoot if you don't want.
To
But
well, to be clear, I mostly go to Costco because I've been hassled enough and I don't want to deal with the hassle. I'll wear shoes, but when I wear shoes, I'm wearing 2 different colors, one on each foot. And one of the last times I was there, I'm in the line at the pharmacy, and the guy behind me says, "Hey, your shoes don't match." And the pharmacist, without even looking up or missing a beat, says, "He's wearing shoes." So they know.
you are known.
Yeah, wait. Here's one that's not safe for work. It kind of is. I was in Whole Foods once in Boulder, Colorado, and they got mad and they said, "Hey, you have to wear shoes." I went, "You're making me wear shoes? That lady's breastfeeding her dog. I mean, cut me a break." So she wasn't really, but you get the hint. It's Boulder. So
I get it. I get it.
so what else? Anything that we missed in terms of just like something that we want to share with people to get them at least curious, because this is all we can do is get them going, and be willing to try this and experience the benefits.
Yes. So if there's hesitation on people's behalf because maybe they've heard stories of someone getting hurt or they have a history of plantar fasciitis and they're hesitant to transfer over, I often tell people, or I explain about stress and recovery, and I just use that as a model. It helps me. It helps me as I explain it to patients that every tissue in your body tolerates a certain amount of stress, right? Wear and tear. And then that is continuously every day balanced and reset based off of what you do over here for recovery. So stress and recovery, these scales, right?
Yep.
So you essentially are trying to increase your stress threshold by strengthening your foot muscles, right? Being very sensorily connected. So all the things that can do it. And then you can also optimize your recovery. So as people transfer to minimal shoes, there is an inherent increase in tissue stress. It makes sense because you're so used to cushion. Well, now your feet have to do more, right? Doesn't mean they're bad. It's just you have to understand this stress and recovery. So on the early side of transferring, either prep your feet by strengthening your foot muscles before you transfer to minimal shoes, or really focus on that recovery component, and then it starts to essentially balance out, and then you feel stronger and stronger. So that's just how I try to guide people when they're
That's
looking
good.
at it.
I use a similar analogy. I go, if you've been keeping your feet bundled up for all this time, imagine you've been going to the gym on a regular basis, and then for whatever reason you have to take a year off. You don't go back to the gym and do the same workout you did a year ago. You go to an embarrassingly small amount of weight for an embarrassingly small number of reps and an embarrassingly small number of sets. And you listen to the feedback. You're going to feel sore the next day because you will no doubt do a little too much too soon. But then you
Mm-hmm.
chill it out, and then you just listen and build up slowly. And I put air quotes around slowly, and thankfully didn't get balloons when we did that. Get air quotes around slowly because you'll progress much faster than you imagine, but maybe not as fast as you want. But trust me, it's like if you have your arm in a cast for all this time, when they take the cast off, you have two choices: never use your arm again, or do some strengthening for a month or so, and you'll be back to business and be maybe even stronger than you were to begin with.
Yeah.
So think of it, like that, like going to the gym, or an analogy of going to the gym. And by the way, before we call it a day, though, since you brought up plantar fasciitis, which is a thing that many people think they have, and we can talk about that, and they think that they need a whole lot of support and a whole lot of whatever else immobilizing their foot. Can you talk about the barefoot perspective on plantar fasciitis? And I'm going to, before I even let you do that one, say that for many people, I give them a test and I go, massage the crap out of your calf and see if that makes a difference. Because if it does, you actually don't have plantar fasciitis. You probably don't. You probably just have tight calves pulling on their plantar fascia. And if you work on the calves, that's going to be a thing. Big thing. I had that happen with a guy. He was a special forces guy, 6'5", 250 pounds, like no body fat. And he said, I got plantar fasciitis from wearing minimal shoes. I got a hunch. Can I stick my thumb in your calf? He goes, okay. And I literally like dug my thumb in a little bit. There's a thumbs up. That's not a thumbs up. And he like fell on the ground, and I just rubbed the crap out of his calf for about 5 minutes. I said, how's that? And he goes, that's like 90% better. I said, go back to the base, have your physical therapist do what I just did or more, and let me know what happens. I bumped into him a year later. He goes, that took a week, totally fine after that.
Yeah.
So back to you for the win on plantar fasciitis.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, depending on, not even necessarily depending on foot type, but oftentimes people are getting tissue stress because of their inability to tolerate impact forces. And I find that that is either because of they're just completely disconnected from their feet. They haven't worn minimal shoes, been barefoot. They're just used to artificial support and cushion, that they're just sensorily disconnected. That could be one. Could be that they have overpronated flat feet that just need to be strengthened and be a little bit quicker, right, as far as the perception.
Yep.
Or it could be that they're super rigid, like a higher arch. So there is a lot of this conservative awareness, strengthening, or mobility, which is kind of what you're describing with this other
Yep.
gentleman with his calves, right? So you can start there and then if it is, most people is because their feet are weak and their muscles are not doing the job.
Yeah.
When we walk and when we strike the ground, we experience impact, and impact is perceived as vibration. How you damp vibration is through contractions of your muscles, meaning the small muscles in the bottom of the foot. So you have to have a foot that is sufficiently strong to contract and stiffen fast enough over and over and over and over. And that's actually a lot of the strengthening that's demonstrated through these research studies that you shared, is because the 26 muscles are stiffening upon impact, or actually before impact, to absorb the vibration. And people don't realize that. And then you transfer that to the plantar fascia and you get plantar fasciitis.
I'll let you start on this one. Can you talk about how arch support gets in the way of everything you just described?
So rigid arch supports, there's
Yes,
obviously
that's what
different
I'm
levels
referring
of
to.
it,
Yeah.
but a normal part of how your foot loads energy dynamically is your arch compresses. So arch compression is like the spring in a sense. And in order to compress, you can't have a stiff, I was trying to see if I had something, a stiff, rigid arch support here, because then you land and your arch can't do that, right? Because it's in the way. So there is research study that's showing different activities, different foot types, and it measures the degree of arch compression and how much play you have to have within the foot and the bones and the ligaments and the fascia. And too aggressive of rigid arch support totally takes away the arch compression, which means, well, where is that impact going, right? It's going somewhere in the body. And so that's an important reason why, if I have to make orthotics for someone, let's say they have a diagnosis of something, post-tib tendon, whatever, a walking orthotic should never be the same as a running orthotic. And that is huge, because the flex and the arch compression that is needed when we run is very different than when we walk. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about either.
Well, there are a couple things related to that. You give me a flashback to, there was a time when I first got back into sprinting 17 years ago and was getting injured all the time. This one doctor suggested that I needed an orthotic, and it was a 3/4 orthotic. And I said, how's that going to help me when I'm sprinting? Because I'm always on the ball of my foot and forward. I never even come close to using that part of the support. And he was completely perplexed by that one. And similarly, I have a theory, especially for runners, and especially for runners in quote traditional shoes or normal shoes, where they're overstriding, so their foot is landing in front of their body, they're landing on their heel, and by the time their foot comes down, it's totally flat. And back to what we said at the beginning of like using your toes to engage your arch, in that shoe you can't do that. So in fact, they built the arch support into the shoe because the shoe wasn't letting their foot move to begin with. So why not incapacitate the arch so that it doesn't have to be put under strain when it's already stretched? So ironically, you know, the thing that shoe companies have built in that they tell you is to support your arch is the thing that's often causing that plantar fasciitis and those similar injuries.
Yeah,
What a shock.
unfortunately, it's such a polarizing, different school of thought from
Yeah.
how I was taught in podiatry school to how I look now as a functional podiatrist, to traditional shoe companies versus natural shoe companies, to chiropractic, physio. Like everyone essentially has these different perspectives. So that's where I always encourage people to ask you questions about your own body. You have to try things. You have to ask and push into the white coat that is telling you something a little bit. And sometimes, I mean, I'm huge in patient advocacy. That is one thing that I'm very much standing behind, and take ownership. And if that doesn't resonate, let's say I was seeing a patient, I was like, you need orthotics. And for any of the listeners, that's pretending you're the patient. If that doesn't feel authentic to you or doesn't resonate well with you, then you can say why or what else. There are more options. There's not only one option.
Here's a fun question you can ask is how many need orthotics? And oops, and if it's a lot, you know, you might want to inquire about that. There was one other point I wanted to make about that one. What was it? Oh, the trying things. Can you think of any situation other than, how do I want to put it, some significant, I don't like the word deformity, but under what conditions, if any, and what percentage of people that you bump into might have these conditions, can they not start exploring a more minimalist or barefoot way of going through the world?
Yes, so that would be severe ligament laxity, post-tib tendon tears, severe deltoid ligaments. You're talking the 1%, right?
Yes.
So it is a very small
Yeah.
percent. Yes.
In other words,
Yes.
if you're wondering, can I do this? The odds are pretty good. The answer is yes. Because if you have one of the things that Emily just described or something worse, you know. You've been dealing with that for a long time with serious medical professionals, not just going to your running shoe store and saying, hey, what should I do about this?
Yes.
So that's, yeah. So in other words, almost everybody. And if you're worried, you can reach out to people like us, and we're happy to help and point you in the right direction as needed. In fact, you work with people remotely sometimes. And so, there are people who are, and more people getting hip to this every day. So if you are going to see a medical professional, you can check and see, do you have any experience with people being in barefoot shoes or truly minimalist shoes? Because there are some shoes called minimalist, I'm using air quotes a lot today, that are not. And quick, I wish I had something right in front of me to show off, but I'm working from home today, long story. Anyway, but a truly minimalist shoe, wider foot-shaped toe box, low to the ground, non-elevated heel, really flexible, as little cushioning as you can get away with, crazy, crazy lightweight, and a sole that lets you feel sensations from the ground. So if they have no experience with that, they might have opinions, but if they have no experience with it, I'd take off. I remember years ago being part of a panel discussion where all these, I'm going to use air quotes again, medical professionals said that it could take years to be able to actually, live in any way in bare feet, even in your own home. And I finally, at one point, said, how many of you have run on pavement in bare feet for at least a mile? And I raised my hand and no one else did. I went, you guys are just making these things up. You have no experience with this. This is 15 years ago when this was all kind of brand new, but it's like you're extrapolating from ideas that are false to begin with. So until you've taken a dive in, gotten some experience, looked at the research, and then there wasn't a lot, now there's a ton 15 years later, you're just making things up to justify what you already believe.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So it is no longer a trend. It is very much of a validated research-based method, which essentially is here to stay.
Yeah, no question. Well, speaking of here to stay, we're here to go. So, Emily, if people want to find out more about what you're up to and what Naboso is doing, how would they do that?
Absolutely. So head to naboso.com, naboso.com. This is for all of our sensory-based products. Most of our products are available at xeroshoes.com. So definitely just when you're buying your next pair of shoes, get a Neural Ball or some toe spacers from there as well. Or if you want to learn more about how I see patients, my website is thefunctionalfootdoc.com. I do see virtual patients. So most of my patients are actually virtual, otherwise here in Arizona. And then I have lots of content on YouTube.
And for people who want to check out a pair of Xero shoes, again, even for just walking around the house or something at the campsite or a sandal when you're at the beach, or actually we even have winter boots that I was using when we had 8 inches of snow here in Colorado yesterday. You can go to xeroshoes.com. We have over 60 different styles of casual and performance shoes, boots, and sandals for everything you can think of, so you can feel what you've been missing: natural comfort, performance, and health, and then you can go out and have fun and live life feet first. All right, everyone, take care. Have fun.
Bye.